presentation is New Scientific Principles Lead to New Natural Laws. In the last 100 years, there really hasn't been a major scientific discovery in regards to new natural laws. We are in a scientific dark age, and these scientific principles lead us to dozens of new natural laws. The first few chapters of the Universal Model point out several principles that are important to know. And these are the principles that define the character of one that will grasp onto the principles of the Universal Model and run with them and become what we call a UMer. One is answers come from questions. One must be willing to ask questions in order to find answers. Answers just don't appear. There must be a question before that answer can be given. And so answers come from questions. When you are presented with something, question it, everything, but question it with an open mind. You may not have learned, or maybe you have been taught something else, such as when my friend asked me, what's in the center of the earth? Magma? Well, are you sure? I don't know. And then he began to tell me other discoveries that shows that there is not magma in the center of the earth. Because I was open-minded, I was then able to learn more and more and more until I know much of what's in the Universal Model. In nature, the simple truth is that truth is simple. It does not need to be complex. And I will show you throughout the presentation how simple science really can be. Truth is the same every time you question it. If it changed, then it isn't truth. Truth is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Scientific truth is the same yesterday, today, and so far as we know, will be true tomorrow as well. For example, the geocentric model taught that the Earth was the center of our solar system. But with additional technology, we were then able to see that the sun actually is the center of our solar system. So at one point, the geocentric model was true as far as they knew. And now we know that it is a heliocentric system. And last but not least, hard questions are always easy when you have the answer. I love that one. Now, in science in general, we grew up, probably did a science experiment or had to do a science project, and the teacher taught you that you needed to come up with a hypothesis and then run some tests and then there's a conclusion and such, and that's that scientific method. There is no single set of steps in science today that constitutes the scientific method. Rather, there are different traditions in different scientific fields about what is investigated and how. Here's an example. These are different textbooks that you can find in different fields of science. You can see that here in Psychology in Action, they start with a theory, and then they have a hypothesis. They have 9 steps until they get to case studies. That's the end of their scientific method. You come over here to health chemistry. They start with a hypothesis, and then they end with a theory. Here we have observations. We have a law, but then they go back to a theory, but then the theory is tested for further experiments, and so there's no uniform set of standards that the scientific community is adhered to. Where is that standardized method?
Do you want questions as we go, or at the end?
Yeah, at the end would be great, because I did practice this earlier, and I will go over if I take questions. That's just how I am. Contractors, a house builder, you don't start with the roof, you start with the foundation, right? Just like in science, it is important to start with the theory and end with a new natural law. The National Academy of Sciences said this in The Nature of Science in 1998. Theories are the endpoints of science. They're not even looking for new natural laws. They stop at theories, which is a problem because theories are where the scientific method actually begins. Let me tell you about Grady Schloss. By the way, the Schloss family is an amazing family. They have 7 kids. They have a young boy named Grady. He has 5 older sisters and 1 younger sister. He is a very happy boy, and I know because all of his needs are met because he has 5 moms, or 6 moms, I guess you could say, right? And he loves to play. He's really good at playing. He's about 4 years old. I know that he'll be a good hard worker because, well, work for a kid is playtime. If they know how to play hard, then they're probably going to be a pretty good worker when they get older. And I have no doubts about Grady. I do teach a homeschool co-op class about the universal model. We're homeschoolers. My kids attend. And they volunteered me to teach the science class, and I said, okay, so I teach about 30 kids between the ages of 4 to 11. That is the age group that I teach. And one day I was teaching about the universal scientific method, and to help them understand what a method was, I had them draw a picture of something that they enjoyed doing. After they drew their picture, I had each of them come up and present what it was that they were doing and to teach us what are the steps to do what it is that you love to do. Well, Grady came up and he's holding his little jaws with some googly eyes on there, and he gave us 5 steps to play with a wind-up toy. Step 1 is you got to find a wind-up toy, right? So he got himself a wind-up toy, and then step 2, you wind it up. Step 3, you let it go. Step 4, you watch it. You watch these little teeth bounce around on the table and chomp around, and then these googly eyes poking out, and then you laugh. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. His mom said that he played with this toy for about 3 weeks without stopping. I mean, he slept with this toy. It is a simple method. He didn't get into the mechanics. Well, first you need to get the plastic that's just right, blah, 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 and then the gears in there, and you try to just. It was very simple. It's a simple method that he taught us. So the simple truth principle, once again, in nature, the simple truth is that truth is simple. So the universal scientific theory is, first you have a theory, then you have a prediction. Once you make your prediction, you run some tests, you make your observations, you evaluate those observations, and based on those evaluations, you then have now discovered or witnessed for yourself a new natural law, if it's never been discovered before. In the universal model, there are hundreds of new scientific discoveries and dozens of natural laws that have been discovered following this method. They were all discovered following this method. The universal model doesn't go into the theory or prediction because the book, you can tell, volume 1 is 800 pages. You can imagine if he included all of that, it would be a much broader and greater work. So the universal model is based mostly on the testing, the observations, the evaluation, and what are those natural laws. But let's go through it together. A theory is a proposed explanation for natural phenomena that is conjectural and subject to verification. Science is not settled. There is no such thing as settled science. Just because Dean already discovered it doesn't mean that I can't go and discover it for myself as well. Just because I've already run these experiments doesn't mean you can't go and run some of these experiments and discover that for yourself. And if you run the experiments and you get a different answer, then we've got something to resolve, thank you. Because a natural law if it is is basically truth. Truth is not truth unless it's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So let's do a theory. Does water expand when it turns into steam? Yes. Okay. My proposed explanation, my theory behind that is yes. Why? Because of my own personal experiences. I live in Mesa. I left a water bottle in my car. It's supposed to look like this, and it now looks like this. It is deformed and misshaped. Why? Because in Mesa, in the summer, it gets to be about 250 degrees. I don't know what it gets in the car, but it is hot, much hotter than outside, and outside it's 120 degrees. And so you can imagine what it's like inside the car when you go inside the store or something like that. So according to my experiences, my proposed explanation is that it does because I have seen that. So let's run some tests. Let's make a prediction. We will get something that we can observe. So we'll get some balloons, we'll put some water in it, we'll tie them off, and we'll see if this water, when turned to steam, blows up this balloon. The prediction is the ability to predict a consequence from a stated action. The stated action is water turning to steam. What do we predict? That it's going to expand. So here's my son. He's 6 years old. He's like my little sidekick. He loves the universal model. I don't know if he loves it more. If he loves it more, if I do. He even drew his own little comic book with universal model science guys in there and stuff like that. It's great to see him grasp onto and love science. So we got 3 balloons. The prediction was that the balloon will increase in size as the water turns to steam. Testing, it must be repeatable. It must be observable. You cannot observe millions of years. Nobody has ever observed magma in the center of the earth. It is untestable. And then the prediction is to verify or falsify a prediction based on the testing is to verify or falsify the prediction based on your observations. So here's the first one I put in the refrigerator at 38 degrees, and it stayed that way. Nothing really happened. We know at 38 degrees, water doesn't turn to steam. This one was outside in the sun. It didn't really do anything either. It just didn't get hot enough, I don't think. And now I'm going to theorize why it didn't blow up, because I'm just giving a proposed explanation. That one would lead to further testing, meaning I need to do it on a hotter day or on a colder day. Put the balloon in there at 30 seconds, and after 20 seconds, we'll see what happened. Or excuse me, after 10 seconds. And there you see, the balloon, after just 10 seconds in the microwave, increased in size. You can hear the kids going, ooh, ah. Right now my daughter's, is it tied off? And then here's my son. Oh, what do you think? Do you think it was hot? I asked him, I said, was it hot? And he said, yeah. It's amazing. Even when I did this experiment with all the kids in the co-op, they all, for some reason, wanted to reach out and touch it. Every time they wanted, I said, it's hot. Oh, okay. And so they touched it to make sure it was hot. And then they got burned. So I said, ow. And so the next kid, is it really hot? And then they would touch it. I don't know why they do that, but they do. That's just what we do. We want to know for ourselves and discover for ourselves certain things. Observations is a description of nature or phenomena on the 5 physical senses and logic. So, what are our observations? The balloon in the fridge and outside never really increased in size. The balloon in the microwave increased in size. How do we know that? Because we used our sight to see it grow. If we wanted to get a little more in particular with it, we could have measured it. Water, when it turns to steam from liquid water, it expands 1,700 times its volume. So if you have 1 gallon of water sitting right here on the table, and I turned that water to steam and captured it, we would then have 1,700 gallons of steam by volume. So you can see how much it's a great expansion rate. It was hot. Why? How do we know that? My son touched the balloon and burned his finger. After it began to cool off, something else that we observed is it shrunk back down. It began to condense and turn it back into a liquid water. And it returned to its original size. Evaluate. We either accept or reject through our evaluations of our observations whether our prediction was accurate. If it was accurate, then we are going to accept that we have a new natural law, or that we have observed a natural law that has already been discovered. So, we accept, yes, that water does expand when turned into steam. A natural law is a predictable effect from a stated cause. My daughter, she goes, "Hey Dad, an experiment must be repeatable." So she took the plate, and she put it in the microwave, turned it on, and sure enough, what happened? It expanded and blew up again. And so it is repeatable. It will happen over and over and over and over again. It happened yesterday, today, and it will again tomorrow. This is actually Charles's law that was discovered in the 1780s by Jacques Charles. Now let's do another experiment. We'll move through these a little quicker. Everybody knows Mr. Miyagi from the original Karate Kid. You put your hands together and rub them. So let's have everybody go ahead and put your hands together. Start rubbing them together. You don't need to push too hard, but rub them. And this is when it's cold outside. You rub your hands together to warm them up. Well, rub them a little faster now. There's a little more heat there. Now, put some pressure. Push a little harder and rub just as hard. Do you feel that heat? So the more pressure you push on your hands, the more heat you're creating. If you do that hard enough and long enough, you're going to end up with some of these little skin lava, flakes of skin and dirt that'll come off your hand. Friction does cause heat. It happens over and over and over. Unless you don't have nerves in your hands, it's going to generate heat. If you don't have nerves, you won't feel it, but it still generates heat. Here's another experiment. This was done in Liverpool, and this is on andesite, which is a type of volcanic rock. This is so we can observe rock actually melting and turning into a molten type lava. So you can see at the beginning, there's not a whole lot of heat, but that hydraulic press is pushing down harder, creating more pressure. As it spins, then that volcanic rock then melts and becomes a type of molten lava right there. Pretty amazing. Now, if that hydraulic press turned on for just a few seconds and then turned off, there wouldn't have been enough heat to melt that rock. It takes prolonged periods of friction in order for that rock to melt. If you look at this map, you'll see that it's a map of the world, and right here is the Ring of Fire. We're right in here, and you'll see the red triangles are all representatives of volcanoes, and then these black lines outline the continental plates. But those black lines aren't necessarily lines, they're thousands of little dots. Those little dots, as you can see down here, all represent earthquakes. Earthquakes in fault lines cause friction. Pressure without movement does not create heat. Once that begins to slip and creates friction or movement, then the heat is generated in the fault lines. So based on our experiment with our hand, rubbing it together and creating more and more pressure, by the way, if you just put your hands together, you're really not going to create much heat other than what your body temperature is creating in between those. So two rocks pushed together doesn't create heat, that they must rub and create friction in order for that heat to generate. What does that lead us to? One of the new natural laws discovered and written about in the universal model, the frictional heat law. Frictional heating produces lava from pressure and movement in fault planes. That is the definition for the frictional heat law. Right now, modern science teaches us that these fault lines, the only purpose is for magma to come up through the fault lines and to come out as volcanoes. The universal model, based on other scientific experiments and research and discoveries, teaches that the lava that comes out in volcanoes is caused by the frictional heat in these fault lines. So now let's talk about our experiment with water, and it expands 1,700 times its volume. You have fault lines, and there's water all over in the earth. You get a hydrologist, and they're going to drill down for you. They're going to find water so you can pump it out in a well or whatnot. There is water all throughout the earth. You get water along a fault line that's active, it's going to generate heat. This lava is going to go through the fault line, it's going to find the water line, it will turn it to steam, and once that water line turns to steam and becomes 1,700 times its volume, it needs to go somewhere. It's going to go in the path of least resistance where there is less pressure on it. It's not going to explode down, it's going to explode towards the surface of the earth. And that's when we get a phreatic explosion or a hydro crater or hydro fountain. This is the after effect. You can see it's a diatreme. A diatreme is basically a funnel shape underneath a crater. That's what a diatreme is. If this was an impact crater, meaning an explosion from above, such as when you ignite an atomic bomb above the ground, it will be a bowl shape. If it's an explosion that comes from below, it'll be this funnel shape. Why does that matter? Well, look at just the southwestern part of the United States, how many hydro craters there are. One in particular that you may not have heard it called the Arizona hydro crater, you have heard it called the Arizona Meteor crater. How many of you have been there? Well, it's an amazing, if you haven't been there and you're passing through Flagstaff, make a detour and go check it out. It's an amazing crater to go walk along the rim of it, and you can go down, they have little telescopes for you to look at the different parts of the crater. But if you're going there and you follow the signs as you're there, it'll say, first proven meteor crater. And they say it's proven. Well, there's a couple of things there, and I'll just give you a few of the discoveries that will show otherwise. This crater is in the crosshairs of two fault lines. Right in the center of the crater are two fault lines. Underneath this crater is a diatreme. The diatreme is a funnel shape where water once exploded out. So the Arizona Meteor crater is not a meteor crater, it is a major hydro fountain. It was a huge, huge explosion. It's a massive volcano, really, really fascinating to see. So what is the mechanism for causing this frictional heat? Right now, if you go to your kids and they're taught in science class, they're going to say that it's because of magma. The convecting movement of magma is causing this uplift and subduction of the continental plates, which moves the fault lines and creating this movement and friction and heat. But if you take magma out of the question, now what is causing this movement? If you look up to the celestial, the moon actually does play a role in its gravity affecting things here on Earth. We know it because you've been to the beach, you see the tide go out, comes back in, It goes out, you make your sand castle, it comes back in, destroys it. It goes out, you dig a deep hole, and it comes back, fills it in, whatever. The moon also has a gravitational effect on the crust of the Earth. So on April 1st, here at the conference center, this conference center went up and down 12 inches. Up and down. So when the sun came up, it went up a few inches, so there's still some gravitational influence from the sun. But when the moon came up, there was a much greater movement. So every day when the moon and sun come up and then go down, we go up with it because of the gravitational pull. And then when the sun and the moon sets, then the continents settle again. And this constant every day going up and down creates that frictional heating in the Earth's crust. It creates more and more pressure, and then eventually when the time is right, it slips and then we get an earthquake. If we look at Io, one of Jupiter's moons, this is the most volcanically active celestial body in our solar system. It is tugged and pulled in every direction, and then when the other three moons and Jupiter line up across from it, then you get at least, look at this, 100-meter solid tidal bulge, meaning it goes it causes 100-meter, or the size of a football field, that would go up and back down. Here is a satellite image on the surface of Io. This is a lava lake, not just a little lava flow like you see in Hawaii. This is a lava lake. It is the most volcanically active celestial body in our solar system because of the celestial bodies around it tugging and pulling on it and misshaping it. And that leads to the next law in the universal model, the gravitational friction law. Frictional heating in the crust of celestial bodies, not just Earth, is caused by gravitational pull and release of the crust by other celestial bodies. This one's fascinating. This was a fun experiment. This one you can do at home as well. These are 4 jars. If you have 2 jars with, I think these are hot, and then the 2 yellow jars are cold. If you mix yellow and blue, what do you get? You get green, right? So this experiment is going to be a demonstration of convection. Convecting currents are affected by the cooling and heating of molecules. Hot water wants to rise. Why does hot water want to rise? Because it is less dense. Cold water will sink. Something that is less dense sinks. Something that is less dense, like a soccer ball, will float, and a bowling ball will sink. So now, very carefully, we'll get a playing card, and these are like Prego spaghetti sauce jars. And so if you save your jars, you can do this experiment, or any other jar, just as long as they're matching, so that the 2 rims can match up with each other. So you take them and you stack them. You get a playing card, put it on top, flip it over, and when you stack it, then you slowly, carefully move that playing card out. What happened here? There was the convection process occurring. The 2 colors mixed, creating green, and it was great to see those kids' eyes just bulge, their eyeballs were bulging out. Wow, it's so cool. But this one did not mix, and it was fun to, why didn't it mix? And then they all gave their theories, their proposed explanations of why. But really, it's because the blue jar is the hot water, and the yellow jar is the cold water. It's not going to mix. The hot water is already on top. It's already there. So, this theoretical magma convection. The center of the Earth is a hot molten core. That's where the heat is generated. It melts the Earth and it causes the heat to move away from it. So heat in convection, the heat moves away from the heat source, and the cold air or molecules whatever they may be, will then move towards the heat source. Then they are heated up and they'll move away, and then it causes this convecting cycle. Over millions and millions of years, that's what they say is happening, is this convection process. It only took a few seconds, not even a minute, for these two jars in the green to turn green, and to mix, right? So if over millions of years this process is happening, lava coming out of volcanoes should be uniform in the chemical composition of it. But in this book, Mantle Convection and Plate Tectonics, they found a flaw in this theory. And that is that there are differing chemical compositions of lava coming out of volcanoes that are only miles apart. Through these simple experiments, we can see that magma does not exist in our Earth. This is something from volume 2, the fossilization process. I love going through the fossil model. That chapter alone is like 300 pages. It's like a book within itself. There's a great value in each of these volumes. Fossilization pseudo-theory, what do they tell us happens? Something dies. And then after that thing dies next to a stream or whatnot, it's then buried because of the water flowing over it, and there's some sediment and whatnot. Subsidence happens, it sinks down, and over millions of years, which is untestable, then you get a petrified or fossilized bone or tree or whatnot. Whatever was living, it then becomes a fossil. So there's a problem there, and because it's untestable, right? But if you look at what the has discovered, that before the flood, animals were just living as they do. Then the flood began through those hydrocraters that I talked about. Water came from the center of the earth, flooded the surface. Animals died. They were buried. Some of them were already dead. Probably why they got buried. If they were alive, they were hurrying to higher ground, right? So those fossils that we see today could very well have been from animals that had already died shortly before the flood occurred. Then in the hyperthermal conditions, which is at least 5 miles deep of water, because Mount St. Helens is 5 miles tall. If every mountain were to be covered, it would at least have to be that deep. It just so happens that 5 miles deep underwater is 14,000 psi. That's the pounds of pressure that's needed in order to make a rock, a crystal, or a fossilized something. Then erosion occurs over time, thousands of years, because they look at the erosion around these bones that they find in the ground and whatnot, and it has only been thousands of years, not millions of years. And then today we get, if you go to the Petrified Forest in Arizona, which is straight east of the Arizona hydrocrater, you will be able to see for yourself many trees that were fossilized during this process. Here I am at Dean's house the other day. I had to go over there and observe for myself firsthand what he did. He made an autoclave, which is basically a contraption. It's a tube that can withstand high pressures. He put pieces of an apple tree that he had in his backyard in this autoclave. It was full of water. He had a saline solution in there. He had a mineralizer. There's a quartz crystal there. As he turned up the heat and increased the pressure, this quartz began to break down. It just like you would make your own syrup. You put sugar in water, you boil it, it then dissolves and turns into a liquid. After the pressure is then released or the temperature is reduced, this quartz would then precipitate out of the water and take place of what used to be the apple tree. And he made his own fossils, his own petrified wood. Here's another image of that petrified wood. And you can see some images in the back on the poster as well as you go out. I had to see it firsthand, and it was amazing to see what he was able to accomplish in just a few days. It took days to create and fossilize, petrify this wood, not millions of years. Last slide is this is amber. Amber comes from tree sap. I was at Rod Meldrum's house helping him load up some things over the week, just yesterday, and in his front yard he has a pine tree, and I saw just tons of this sap oozing out of it, and I said, Rod, please let me go gather up sap. Can I have that? He said, oh yeah, take all you want, I don't care. And so I took it, and I got a whole bunch of it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to then, with my kids, we're going to do our own experiment. We're going to try and make amber the way that we're taught in the textbooks. We're going to see if it works. We're going to take this, we're going to go bury it in the backyard, and then we'll probably wait about a year and go dig it up and see what is left of it. Did it become amber or not? Is it even there anymore? Did it disappear? We don't know. We're going to find out. This piece of amber shows a lot about the flood. If I might point out just two things here. These little things here are fish eggs. How can you get fish eggs to preserve in tree sap over millions of years? Inside each of these little fish eggs, or what is the remaining of a fish egg, are
Embryo.
Say it again?
Embryos?
Well, they're embryos, yes. Why am I forgetting the name? Water with, or a rock with water in it. A geode. Anhydro. My goodness, the most famous rock of all of the universal model is an anhydro. Each one of these little eggs is an anhydro. As we took it and we moved it and twisted it, you could see the little air bubbles moving in there. It always stayed up as we moved the amber around. These right here are fish eggs. Or excuse me, frog eggs. So you have frog eggs and fish eggs in this amber. Why is that significant? Because the universal flood happened in the springtime, when waters began to warm up and animals began to lay their eggs, such as fish and frogs. Amber is only made in a hypertherm, just like fossils. There's only one time in the history of the world when the earth, on the surface of the earth, was covered with water enough to create a hypertherm to fossilize animal bones and petrified wood. Thank you.